Welcome to Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, public relations, and authentic storytelling. I'm your host, Lisa Buffo, the founder and CEO of the Cannabis Marketing Association. You can find us on Instagram at Party Like a Marketer, or you can find me at LeeBuff, or on Twitter at LeeBuff21. Whether you're new to this space, an experienced professional, or someone who is simply driven by curiosity about cannabis marketing, Party Like a Marketer has something for you. Today's conversation features Andrea Bollier. Andrea is the founder and creative director at Studio Linear, a female-owned boutique cannabis design company that works with clients in the cannabis industry, creating their branding, packaging design, marketing, and custom web design. Andrea lives lakeside in the beautiful state of Maine with her family in a renovated RV, living the remote dream. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, public relations, and authentic storytelling. Today's guest is Andrea Bollier, the founder and creative director of Studio Linear. Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. I'm so excited for this, and it's such an honor to be part of this podcast. Thank you.
Of course. I am so excited to talk to you because I know you are an expert in cannabis branding, which is a question that we get asked a lot. And a lot of folks want to know about what are cannabis branding best practices? What does the future of branding look like? Where have things been? Where are they coming? And I feel like branding is one of those areas where we've seen leaps and bounds of progress in a really short period of time in the industry, due to professionals like yourself who have come in and really spiced up and sophisticated these brands. So I'm really excited to get into it with you.
Thank you.
Yes. So let's get started. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, who's Andrea? Tell us about Studio Linear, and give our audience a little background on who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, thank you for the really nice introduction. So yeah, I'm obviously I'm a designer by day, but when you really get to who I am, I'm also a mom. I have two wonderful kids, an amazing husband, and my background is actually in music. I went to college for music and horticulture. I had no formal training in design, so I'm all self-taught. I remember learning Photoshop in the very early days when it first came out. And then, it's funny how life, the different paths that we took have led to Studio Linear coming to fruition. It was just something I really loved. And when we first started, though, we worked with a lot of musicians in the music industry because of my background. And we also worked in the food and beverage industry. And since then have obviously shifted and pivoted to focus mainly on the cannabis industry.
And where are you located? You were doing music and now you're in cannabis. Where's that?
Yeah, well, I'm located in Maine. So it's pretty awesome here. My husband and I have definitely traveled and lived abroad and traveled a lot with our kids. This past summer, we actually renovated an RV and lived the RV life, which is not as glamorous as Instagram makes it seem. But so yeah, I live in Maine. I love it. It's where I grew up, and it's where we came back to after so many years.
And when did you found Studio Linear? Was it before you got into cannabis, or is it your cannabis agency?
That's a great question. I actually started it many years ago, working at night. So I worked during the day. My son was one, and I had a daytime job, and also was a stay-at-home mom. So I started Studio Linear working evenings from my kitchen when everyone would go to sleep. Because it was something I loved to do. In the beginning, it was actually not called Studio Linear. There's a really dorky name. It was called Creative with an F, Creative Design, which I'm super embarrassed I ever called my business that. But anyway, I started it years ago just because it was an outlet of creativity for me. So for friends and family, I would design logos and websites. And then, fast forward so many years, we actually I opened up a studio, and when we had our daughter, when she was first born, I sort of looked at the business model, and having a studio wasn't something that I actually wanted anymore for myself, my business. So we actually went remote about 4 years ago, which has been very beneficial, obviously, in these times that we all work remotely. And I shifted to cannabis about 2 years ago because of personal reasons. I, use cannabis products, and it was something that morally I aligned with and wanted to work more with clients in that industry versus some of the other industries that we worked in.
So you had a physical studio, and was that named Studio Linear? And then you kept the name
Correct.
as you went remote? That makes sense.
Yeah.
Could you mind me asking where you got the name from?
It actually came from my dad. So my dad was a big part in, finding this path. He always told my sister and I to find something that we love and make it our job. And throughout life, I never quite found that love, I guess, until I fell into design. And then, all the doors started opening. It made sense. And so, of course, naturally, I came back to my dad when I was trying to think of a name, and I explained what our process is like a linear process in, you're starting your foundation and branding and moving through the process to an end point, which is launching. And we actually did, I know you hear people joke like we sketched on a napkin. We literally did sketch it like on a paper towel at our house. And so that's where the name came from.
That's awesome. Yeah, like any good branding professional, there's a story with it, and the name plays into the concept. I love that. So you are an expert in branding, and we've got a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this podcast at various stages of their cannabis marketing journey. So for the entrepreneurs in the audience, particularly those who are in the early stages of building their brands, what are some words of advice you have from that branding perspective? Like what do you wish your clients knew at the beginning, or any just advice you have for those who are in the early stage about how to approach branding for their business?
That's a great question. And so we do get several types of clients who come through the door, and one of them obviously is a startup in the industry. And one thing I know that I can recommend is having a clear vision for who you are. I guess your brand voice or brand message is really critical, and it helps a design team then take that messaging and develop creative or designs that then reflect that message. And so a good starting point, if you haven't already, is to work with someone probably in more specific in the cannabis copywriting or branding, brand messaging part of the business, and trying to develop that first. Now, I know that you don't always have the time or the resources to do so, so it's not critical, but it's just a really nice stepping stone for an agency to then take and then build upon. I'd also say that, when you're first starting out, like myself, when I first started out, obviously resources, funding, budget is all very, very important. And so we work with startups who come through the door who, there is a budget that has to be kept in mind. I would say be as transparent and open about what you feel comfortable spending right off the get-go with any agency. That way you don't get into a situation where expectations were this, but you didn't receive this. So we're very open and trying to be flexible with clients and their budget, but it's just a good practice, as we all know, to try to be as open as possible with our funds and budgets.
And I love what you said about almost writing out and planning for that brand voice and what it sounds like. Because I think with a lot of startups, I mean, it was even the case with CMA, where the brand voice in the beginning, it's just the founder doing their best and putting out as much content as they can. And so it gets very intertwined. But to be able to say, okay, here's the company, here's what's different about the company's voice versus just Lisa putting out content, and writing it down so that it can be replicated by a marketing coordinator or a social media coordinator, or someone who can come in and take that voice and take it to the next level and start to even build that company culture by starting to define what the brand is outside of the individuals who are doing the work.
Definitely. And I think it's also, important to decide or discover, assuming you probably already know this when you're starting your business, but really to hone in on what makes you unique. the cannabis industry is up and coming, but is also semi-saturated with,
Yes.
certain products. So defining what it is that you're solving for a problem, if you are with a product, defining why you are unique. Those things, even if it's a Google Doc with an outline, those things are critical when then, transforming that into your branding.
Yeah, and I think this has changed a bit more recently, but prior in the cannabis industry, it was like, why do you even need marketing? Like if you build it, they will come, or weed sells itself. And it's just not the case anymore. It is very saturated, and consumers have choice between products and brands. So all of those things, they do make a difference.
Mhm.
So, so if you are a startup and you are evaluating, working with an agency or a professional, how do you do that? And as a follow-up, I want to hear a little bit about what branding services cost, but how do you evaluate a branding professional, particularly when it comes to things like design or, with marketing it can be like, oh, I can promise 50% ROI running these campaigns because I've done this with other clients. And in growth, it can be very numbers based, but design is a little bit different. So how do you evaluate that? And how might an entrepreneur approach this relationship?
Sure. I think you're right with marketing. It is very numbers based. With design, it's obviously very visual. So we oftentimes have clients who have come to us because they have seen something in our work, in our portfolio, or maybe Instagram that they really resonate with. They feel that we connect with our clients and have done a good job portraying our projects and clients uniquely. And so when you're looking for a design agency, obviously you're going to be looking at their portfolio and the overall, I think, design aesthetic that company puts out. There's definitely, there's so many amazing, talented design agencies out there. Obviously trying to find one that might specialize in cannabis could get you a little bit further. Because there is that experience in knowing what is compliant, what isn't, and it could take you further. But I think that first, really having a conversation. How willing is the design company to hop on the phone with you and, learn about the project? And in that first, 15, 30-minute call, do you connect with them? Does it feel like a good fit? And just ask any questions that you have to find out how willing the company is to share their backstory and just the excitement, like I talk about my business is kind of like my third child, like the middle child. You want a company that also shares that passion for businesses. So I think it's just aligning with the right values. You see something you love and it just feels like a good fit.
Yeah, I hear that. And approximately what do branding services cost? Like, is there a range? And I also want to add in there that, correct me if I'm wrong, but some people have the assumption that branding is just a logo, or it's just, like it's just, okay,
Sure.
I work with you, I get the logo and that's it. But that's not always the case. So can you talk a little bit about that aspect of things, as well as cost and how to approach that?
Yeah, definitely. So there is that stigma that branding is just a logo. So if we do get an inquiry for, can you just make a logo? Oftentimes we say no, because there is a lot more to the process. And there are some companies out there who do a great job developing logos, and we will refer them, to clients who request things like that. Branding is sort of that all-encompassing word. And we do have clients who ask us, they'll say, this is kind of a silly question, but what is branding? What does that include? So branding really starts at that foundation, like we were talking about. It really, if you haven't defined your voice yet or your brand messaging, that's one area that we dive into. But you can even step further back. And if you haven't developed a brand identity or a name, branding can start at that very, first spot. So you can work on naming and then messaging. And then you dive into a collaboration. We always like to use mood boards and collaborating with our clients. We want to make sure we're on the same page. We have quite a process for onboarding with intake forms and worksheets and all kinds of fun homework type of items that help us in those initial stages. And then you get into the actual branding concepts. And for us, a branding concept is primary logos, secondary logos like submarks. So your primary logo might be something that you're using, say, in the navigation on a website, but your submark is something that is perhaps pared down a bit, that's used like on a social media icon, or more simple, perhaps print or a stamp. And then it goes even further into developing, obviously, your color palette, your font selections, your font pairings, and the most important thing, I think, is the brand guide, which is almost a do's and don'ts of what to do with your branding. It outlines the font choices, how to use them in very specific details, such as what font sizes to use, what not to do. Like we joke, like, don't add flames, behind it, or don't add, drop shadows and all these things. So we try to define as much as we can, because throughout the years, as your business grows, you'll be using that brand guide to hand off to other people. And it's important that the branding stays consistent. And then the second part of your question, pricing. I know that all agencies have their own pricing model, but for us, a good starting point for our more standard package would be around 4,000 to 5,000. It takes about 2 months to complete, and there are several of us who work on that. And there's a lot of time that goes into the research. From that, though, we do have more premium packages, which loop in, messaging with our copywriter. Those can go up to around 7,000, 8,000, et cetera. And we have some clients who, money isn't really an issue, and they want all the bells and whistles. So those packages can look more, around 10 to 12,000 for complete branding. But that's more when you get into custom slide decks. That's more for your established businesses.
And I think getting that done up front really can pay for itself over time.
Yeah.
Because it saves you the time and energy of, like, often, I mean, for us, we found, who's doing your social media might be a more junior person in their career and with your company. So having that very clearly written out and articulated is going to save you time as far as training. It's going to help them get clear on what success looks like and start to create that consistency of the brand, which your customers, and leads are going to remember over time, and look more professional and a little bit, I think all of us in cannabis are playing this game of, like, trying to punch above our weight class, where we're trying to, be a little bigger and do more than maybe we actually are. And a really cohesive brand can give that effect.
Yeah, definitely. And we've had some clients who have, tried to tackle it themselves, or had friends and family try to tackle branding, which is great. If you have a talented member in your family who can do design, but sometimes if they aren't savvy with cannabis, you run into the issues of perhaps a logo not being compliant.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, you've invested time and energy into maybe marketing, so you have to step back, which then costs money.
Yeah. And I would like to touch on the compliance aspect a little bit. Because it is, I mean, the foundation of everything cannabis in general, but definitely cannabis marketing, because those are the communications you're putting out to the public. And obviously what the government and regulatory bodies are concerned about is making sure that that is clear and, appealing to the right audience. So could you talk about some of the more important compliance aspect that would kind of distinguish cannabis from every other industry, and how that factors into your work and relationship with clients?
Sure. I mean, I'll touch upon, some, regulations here in Maine, just because I know each state is so very different, and we could spend, 5 hours talking about compliance from state to state.
Yes.
So here in Maine, when developing branding, it can't appeal to anyone 21 or under. And so it's like, well, okay, well, what does that mean? It could mean things like not using animals in your branding, portray, or any element of an animal. We have a client who came to us recently. They were simply using a very geometric wing pattern from a bird. That didn't fly, no pun intended. So we had to redo that for them. They just didn't know, and had been using that branding until, they were alerted that that wasn't compliant.
Were
So
they
we're
alerted
working with
by
them on.
were they, sorry if you don't mind me asking, were they alerted by the like authorities in Maine?
I think so. So when they came to us, they said that we've been told we can't use this anymore. And we didn't ask them specifically who, brought the smack down, but,
Yeah.
I think that they were definitely told. And so we're looking at refreshing that brand and taking it from that. It's very geometric. I mean, I would have trouble. I mean, I guess it's a wing, a bird wing. So when you say, it can't appeal to 21 and under, you're looking at not including people, cartoon-like imagery, animals, etc. So that's just some of the regulations that we definitely try to keep in mind. And when we dive into a project, a lot of our clients have done some research there and oftentimes do have a lawyer on retainer to go back and refer to and ask specific questions about what is and isn't allowed currently in their state, because as you know, it's changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the regulatory bodies too are learning as they go and see what's out there and adjust it. Because we've seen it in other states with even, can you put fruit on it if it's papaya flavor? Can you say that? Can you call that or put cartoon fruit on there? Does that apply to kids? We've seen that in some states too.
Yes, definitely. And there was one company here in Maine, we haven't worked with them, but I felt so bad because their logo is beautiful. So props to whoever designed it. It was I think it's called Sea Main, perhaps. It had a mermaid and it was a fantastic design, but unfortunately, the mermaid is something that, I guess could appeal. I know my 4-year-old, she loves mermaids. So unfortunately, that's something that does appeal to 21 and under.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I want to ask you the same question for brands who are a little bit more established. So once a brand itself is established, how would they work with you? Like, what do you do to maintain the brand itself and then continue to build that? What does that process entail?
Yeah, I would say probably about 50% of our clients are established. And so oftentimes they've come to us because either they have a new CEO or they're looking to pivot within the company. They have been out there doing that and they feel like perhaps they're not hitting the right target audience anymore. Perhaps their work is, or their company looks a bit stale, the branding looks stale in the packaging. So we oftentimes have that established client come to us. They are ready to invest. They've gone beyond, the startup, budget range and are ready to dive into a more comprehensive brand. So at that point, we would really start with a brand audit. Our brand audit is a pretty intensive worksheet. We have a lot of clients who tell us that was quite a learning experience because they've learned a lot about the business. So it really is a deep dive into currently, where are you? Where's that gap and where should you be? And it studies your competitors. So we start there. And then we would formulate, a plan that is going to either refresh the branding, because we do have a lot of clients who are established. They don't want to alarm their consumers for something very different. So it's often a brand refresh, a refresh to the packaging. There might be some compliance changes that they have to now address. And then sometimes a refresh to a website and social strategy. And then with our existing clients, we like to tackle and look at how their, say, a website is performing every year. And so we do recommend, making sure it is staying not only compliant, but is staying relevant. And it's good to be able to track how each campaigns, whether it's social or an SEO campaign, is behaving as it should. So it's important to dive in with that with our established clients.
So you are merging the design aesthetic aspect of it as well as the growth aspect and making sure it's aligning as far as how you want it to look and is it doing what it was intended to do?
100%, because those are, we like to use these projects in our own portfolio. And so if the project itself starts out great and, dips down in, or it isn't hitting the market should, then that just, reflects poorly on us as a design agency. We haven't done everything. So when we work with companies, we often prefer to work with them either on retainer for things that come up that might need updating, or at least coming back to us each year to take a look at, what we have created. Is it still on track? And just make sure it is and update as needed.
That makes sense. And are there any stories you want to share that kind of bring to light what it's work in cannabis branding? I know we talked about this a little bit and how, even starting CMA, so many of us marketers are learning as we go, right? It's trial by fire. It's doing something on the job. It's learning on the job. A lot of it is certainly for me in the beginning, was learning from colleagues and saying, hey, you've been in this industry a little longer, you've launched these campaigns, how did you do it, what did you learn the hard way? And so there's so much to be gained from sharing stories. So do you have any stories like that would kind of demonstrate the aspect of what cannabis branding is like?
I think that that's a really good question. I'd even go back further and saying before we were in cannabis, like you, when I first started, I mean, I had a background in music, so I truly didn't know what I was doing. So I did rely on other entrepreneurs, more specifically female entrepreneurs, because I just found that there was some that I really looked up to and aspired to be like, and they sort of took me under their wing in the very beginning stages. As I dove into cannabis, I relied a lot on connecting with memberships like Cannabis Marketing Association, because I wanted to learn as much as I could. So in the very beginning, putting our feelers out there, testing the waters, seeing what we can learn from other webinars, and just sitting back almost as a student and taking it all in, and then sort of refining who we are that way. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
Yeah.
And thank you. I mean, that's partly why we created CMA, was because that is kind of the way to learn just in the beginning, because it is
Yep.
so steep. And some of these things are, we'll just say, fairly subjective. I mean, even your story about the mermaid and the wings, like that might, some people might see that as appealing to children, others might not, but there's a lot of that gray area that we as in this industry face and as marketers face, trying to, kind of chart that path forward. So that community aspect really does help as well. So as a follow-up to that, I mean, for those who are, and to your point about music, I always think it's funny because I think music is like the best first cousin of cannabis, as in terms of those industries. It's just, they pair so well together. I've loved meeting folks who have come from music who work in their space. They're always so creative and so interesting to speak with. But so if you're new to the industry, but maybe you're an expert in branding or really any other kind of marketing vertical, but you want to apply those skills into cannabis, how do you break in? How did you do it? What are kind of those first steps if you don't have a portfolio in this space, but want to get one?
Sure. For us, our first cannabis client, we weren't obviously advertising that we were in cannabis, and a cannabis company approached us with a dispensary and they wanted branding and packaging. And I took that opportunity to really ask them as much as I could. And I had a really wonderful working relationship with their marketing team, where I felt very comfortable being very transparent and like, I love working in cannabis, so I want to learn as much as I can from you. But in addition to that, I spent a lot of time on the side listening to as many podcasts, like obviously like things like this, listening nonstop, and trying to find out who our dream cannabis client is, where do they hang out, how can I find them, how can I market to them. So for me, it was really, not having a background in this was really just testing the waters. Like I said, getting involved in as many memberships, as many webinars, podcasts, virtual events as I could. Most of my time still is spent doing that, because we have to stay, with what is trending, stay current on everything. So a lot of my time now is spent doing that, and not as much design time anymore. So that's really how we dove into it. And I just asked questions. I wasn't afraid to ever ask, those silly questions. Sometimes people wouldn't write back, but then every once in a while, someone would, and they take time to explain a process or who they use. And the community around the cannabis industry, I think, is like no other community I've ever worked in.
Yeah.
It's not competitive, or if it is, we do a great job hiding that. It seems like it's, everyone wants each other to succeed. And so I have found that if I do have a question, I easily can ask it, like say in the CMA Slack channel, I can ask a question and I get a ton of responses. And you don't get that in any other industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. It does have, I came from tech before cannabis, and the camaraderie and the rising tide raises all ships sort of mentality is very different. Well, since you mentioned trends, I am curious, what are some trends that you're seeing from the branding perspective? Any kind of shifts you've seen over the last few years or things that are popping out in the forefront for you? I know we've seen certainly more of a sophistication as far as what a modern cannabis brand looks like. I don't know how to articulate that in terms of design words, but any trends that you're seeing that are worth sharing?
Yeah, I think that, I used cannabis like way back in college, and it was very, Cheech and Chong. It was very, so we didn't call it cannabis, we just called it weed,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was very different. And it was not the same now. Now when I look at cannabis, I feel like you're getting a lot of those luxury brands. You're getting away from that tie-dyed look, and you're getting into more of a lifestyle brand where cannabis is almost transcending just a product and is becoming part of our ritual, part of our lifestyle. And it is also hitting upon benefits. Cannabis is curing, certain issues. I know myself, I use CBD oil for joint pain, having RA, CBG oil for ADHD. There's reasons why I take them, and I see that in the cannabis industry as a big selling point. And what we're noticing that people are now marketing more and more, it is to help heal something, and it's a healing plant.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that.
Yeah. And I always found it so interesting that, the healing aspect is a spectrum. There's sort of the heavy medical over here. You've got wellness in the middle, and then, we can argue adult use or recreational purposes on this other side. It's not so black and white with it. And there's a lot of folks who are purchasing through, they don't have med cards, but they're purchasing through the adult use market, but they're using things for medical type purposes. And I think that does play into the marketing and branding aspect of what these companies are doing and how they're putting it out and conveying that messaging in a way that is less cut and dry than any other industry or space I've seen as far as something tangentially related, whether it's medicine directly or health and wellness. Cannabis has this really broad, beautiful swath of products and innovations and companies that are communicating what this plant can do. And I just find it so interesting to see when new brands come out, how they're showing that, how they're messaging it, and how, even that conversation comes through when you're talking with a bud tender or reading their sales materials.
Yeah, I love it. And we're pretty lucky to be in the industry because our clients are coming to us because they saw a need for something in the cannabis industry, and they developed, the product because they saw that need. How great of a time that we
Yeah.
can live in right now, that there's a gap and we're like, okay, then I'm just going to start the business because it's not there. We're also seeing a great trend in moving away from alcohol and looking more at like CBD infused drinks and working with clients in that industry, which I personally love. And that's one of the perks of working in the industry, is that you get
Yeah.
to sample all the products.
Yeah. It's market research.
It is.
Always. Yes, I love that. It has been hard with missing in-person events and the ability to connect with folks and try new products in a more sort of industry-friendly social way over the last year and a half. But it is exciting to see that slowly starting to come back.
Mhm.
And what are some things that you wish you knew at the beginning of your cannabis career? Any hard-earned lessons
Hmm.
you're willing to share? Like, wow, that would have made such a difference if I knew that a few years ago.
Well, I think that we slowly, as when we first started, we weren't as on top of researching what is compliant or regulatory. So we would develop branding, and then it would go to like a lawyer after the fact. And so I wish that in the beginning we had double checked with our clients to make sure that they either knew, right off the bat, what was allowed in their state. We do our side of research, but we found that sometimes it is best when the client has the budget to have a lawyer there to help sort of oversee everything. We sort of have a checks and balances system. So we like to say the client, obviously has done their research. We do our research. They have a lawyer, and then we even have printers that we work with that act as sort of our fourth checks and balances to make sure that icon is the right color, the font's the right color, etc. So I wish in the beginning I had known that there was so much to that part of it, and that's why it's so important. Other than that, I think that the only other thing I wish I had known, and this is more of like product use, is I have a wonderful client, and her company, they develop edibles. And she, as a gift, gave me a bunch of edibles and lemonade, and it's THC infused lemonade. I wish I had known the proper dosage before I drank the whole bottle. It's a hilarious story that I drank it's that edible story where you don't think it's working, so you just keep on. So I kept on, and I remember looking at my husband, just being like, "Help me!" Like it all hit at once. So I wish I had known to pay attention to the dosage.
I feel like everyone in cannabis has that accidental
Oh my
dose
God.
myself story that's happened. It's so true. But that's how you learn. And to your point about marketers in this industry have to become compliance experts, regardless of what what kind of vertical within marketing they touch. That is very unique, I think, to cannabis, and can be hard if you're a creative or you're a growth hacker or a social media person, where you're like, I'm here to create and design and put out content, not read hundreds of pages of legalese and make sense 100%, of it.
100%. Yeah.
When it's not a black and white thing, and can change frequently and over time. I know, we're based in Denver, and in the early days here, it was like every 6 months, update to the rules, change in the regs, packaging is looking different now, and it's slowed down and evened out a bit, but it's a lot when you're not an expert in those things by trade, and you have to learn to do that and marry it with your craft or profession as well. But I do think the ability to do that and persevere is the hallmark of a really good, not only professional, but cannabis marketer, and is worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, you're right. And you make such a good point that it is challenging as a creative, because oftentimes you want to just run, with this idea. And in cannabis, you almost have to just sit patiently for a little bit and make sure that what you're dreaming up will be okay. And so it's it's like a balancing act. So in a way, though, I think that that's what I love about it.
Yeah.
And that's what's helped to sort of ground us in a way. It's great. It's challenging and also creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to touch on your point about packaging a bit too, because I think packaging is one of those where it can be very expensive to make mistakes in packaging. And if you aren't either compliant or clear that your packaging is up to speed and going to pass, these compliance tests, it can really cost a brand a lot of money. So it is in their best interest to make sure that who they're working with, they know what they're doing from that marketing and design perspective, but that they can also say, here's how this translates to your physical products and your packaging. And you're not going to need to order, 100,000 new units because it was wrong on the first time.
Yeah, that would be my nightmare. And like, that's the stuff that wakes me up. So we make sure to partner with as many local companies as we can in printing, who understand, who specifically print in the industry. There's plenty of talented printers and printers who have the capabilities, but do they specialize in it? And can they send us a plethora of examples that we can then show our clients? So I think that's really important when working with a design agency, to find out if they have printers that they can recommend that they work with, because that will save you so much in the end. And I prefer to try to use local companies. So we have some pretty awesome East Coast print companies here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Shop local as much as you can. Definitely when it comes to products too, it's much more environmentally friendly than, shipping from halfway across the world.
Yep.
So given all this, what is your number one piece of advice for cannabis marketers? And I'll keep this super broad. Anything you want to say is like number one for you.
I think it is probably, I have to think of this one, for cannabis marketing versus cannabis companies. Is that the question?
You can answer it however you want. If it's companies, that's fine too. Just kind of your best piece of advice as a professional in this space.
I think it is now, because like we mentioned in the beginning, it was all new in cannabis, and pretty much anything you could think of, you could just throw at a wall and it would stick. But now, it's definitely, there's plenty of cannabis companies out there. So I think my biggest tip would be to try to really find what does make you unique, and not just hop on the bandwagon because you can, because you see, oh, okay, this is a company or an industry that I can make money in. It is really having that value and that message that you can then bring to the market is really important, I think. And it's what we're seeing our clients who do have that foundation, who take the time to really nail out that portion, are the ones that we're seeing that are really thriving and taking off. They're developing unique products. They're seeing gaps in the industry where they have room to develop something really new. I think that would be my biggest tip.
And it's a good point, because I think what you said, tying back to the beginning, about even finding who your dream client was, right? Like knowing your unique selling point, USPs, as marketers like to say, as well as your ideal buyer persona, are foundational good marketing best practices as a whole. So kind of regardless of what area of marketing or cannabis that you specialize in, knowing that and having that upfront is going to make the path forward so much easier.
Yeah, definitely. Looking at your business. And so you want to start a business in cannabis, that's amazing. And then finding out, well, what is it? There's so many different options. And what is it that you want to, put out there in the market and that you are passionate about? Because people really resonate with that and they can feel that energy. And like we mentioned in the beginning, hopping on a phone with a design agency, see if they share that excitement. If you radiate that excitement and that passion about your business, your customers also will feel that from you. And that give back, we're also seeing companies who are launching businesses and giving back a portion, or looking at sustainable practices. There's a whole plethora of different things and different avenues that you can look into.
And I think that passion aspect is really important, because anything you do starting a business is hard. And then anything you do starting a cannabis business is like 4 to 5x can be the difficulty. And if you don't really care, it's going to be hard to keep the motivation to stick around. I know for us, I mean, we started fairly early, but it took us so long to find a bank account, so long to find a payment processor, so long to find, certain types of insurance that it would take a normal small business owner an afternoon and a phone call or, a quick sales email. But here it's like, there's all these nuanced layers of when you work in this industry that still is not federally recognized. Cannabis is still a controlled substance that it does impact every corner of the business. So making sure you're really passionate about it, understanding it, and willing to hang in there is going to make all the difference.
Exactly. You have to really want it to make it in cannabis.
Yes. It's not as sexy as it might look on social media, but we do our best.
Yeah.
So, okay. So with that, Andrea, what are your predictions for the future of cannabis brands? Any kind of forward thinking thoughts, as well as, I'm curious, what are you most hopeful or excited about?
I've been seeing and talking with a company here also in Maine, a very talented company that specializes in like VR, AR, this digital dispensary. That really excites me. We're going beyond products and gorgeous, product photography, and we're taking it to the next level where it's more of a AR experience. So I think that some things that I'm excited about is to see things like NFTs and to see, all this new digital tech meet cannabis, because it's definitely, cannabis went to this luxury and now I feel like it's shifting a little bit into a whole nother digital realm, which I love. Spending, time with computers, and I just really like to see that. And the idea of someday of being able to design like a virtual dispensary where you can go in, with like your headset and virtually interact with products, on the shelf and purchase that way. I think that is going to be amazing, and hopefully some next trends.
I agree. And I think COVID accelerated a lot of that. As far as, before it was like, you got to walk in the dispensary and the entire transaction happens there. And with COVID, we did online ordering, curbside pickup, all these things that were coming, just, accelerated that pace so much faster. So I'm with you on the VR, AR thing. I think it will be very cool to do.
I agree.
All right. Well, any other last pieces of advice or anything you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered, I think that like we have mentioned, it's an amazing community to be involved in. And so anyone who's thinking about starting up a business in cannabis, you're welcomed with very open arms, and any resources that you need, and it's out there, and it's a very open community that's looking to help. So I would say anyone who has any questions, to feel free to reach out to us. We're always like excited to help. So if you have any more cannabis branding questions or packaging, just feel free to reach out to us and we can help answer, or join CMA, and you can hop on the Slack channel, which I really love to do, and ask questions if I don't know. So I just, I love it and am honored to be part of this whole industry.
And where could the VR/AR entrepreneurs in the audience get a hold of you?
Yeah, I think, they can obviously email me personally, Andrea at studiolinear.com. And we're pretty active on social. I would say I'm pretty, active on Instagram, so you can message us on there. But feel free to shoot us an email, and we're really quick to reply, and would love to chat if anyone has any, questions about that.
And what are your social media handles?
Great question. It's just at Studio Linear. So yeah, they can find us right on there. So it's just Instagram that we're most active. Once my parents were on Facebook, I was like, all right, peace out. We're not really active on Facebook anymore. So it's really just Instagram.
Nice. Yes. And that's always, I love following brands' Instagram pages because you get to see all the art and design and geek out over it. So that's really cool. Okay, Andrea, well, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time and sharing your insights. And for everyone who's listening, if you have any questions or would like to connect with Andrea, she provided her information, but we're also happy to facilitate that as well. And thank you again. I really appreciate you bringing light to these issues, and look forward to seeing the work you produce for some more brands this year.
Thank you, Lisa. This has been amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, everybody. Thank you. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Party Like a Marketer. Check us out on Instagram at Party Like a Marketer, and on our website, thecannabismarketingassociation.com, and engage with us. We love to hear from you. We'll see you next time for another episode next week.